Mario. Hugely popular Nintendo series, has had lots of games within it. People often say that it's the best 2D platformer series around, and I might agree with that. I am a huge 2D platformer fan. I talked about this in my last video. I really like Mario. I really like stuff like Mega Man or stuff like that. I think it's very simple to understand, but kind of hard to master. The level design is often really important in 2D platformers, and so we're like the physics in terms of how people jump or how people shoot, depending on like what platformer you're playing. But Mario was kind of not the first 2D platformer, but the first one to kind of set the benchmark for what would eventually become what you would think of when you think of a 2D platformer. Mario has had a lot of games within his history, and the original series of 2D platformers ran from the NES to technically the Game Boy with Super Mario Land. However, I'm not going to be playing that just because I don't have a Game Boy and there would be no way for me to review it properly. However, I'm going to take a look at every other game within the original set of Mario 2D platformers, that being the first one, Lost Levels, the American sequel, which is called Super Mario 2 in America, Super Mario 3, and Super Mario Land. And I'm going to talk about all 5 of them, and we'll kind of rank them. Today I'm going to review the first one, Super Mario Bros. Now this one is really different from the other ones in the series. It's super early. It was a launch title for the NES, so they didn't really have a great idea of how to maximize the amount of stuff you can put in an NES game. So it's a very simple game. But that doesn't mean that's bad. The weird thing about this one is, while there is still 8 worlds like most other Mario games, there's only 4 levels per world instead of the typical 8 or so. So it's weird in that way, but it's weird in another way with the worlds, because every other Mario game going forward, each world has its own dedicated gimmick, whether it's grasslands or the desert or a winterland, something like that. Every Mario game after the first one has it divided into worlds like this, and while they do get harder as they go, it also just introduces a new level of, oh, this is green, this is a green land, this is a mountain, whatever, stuff like that. In the first Mario game, they didn't do that, at least not in the same way, because while there is still differences in the types of levels there are, it's not divided into worlds. Rather, in the first Mario game, it's divided into stages. So World 1, for instance, the first level in that is a grassland. The second one is an underground stage. The third one is like an air stage. It's like, it takes place on like floating platforms. And then the fourth one is the castle. Now, the third one within this game changes depending on the world. Sometimes it's one in the air, sometimes it's just a normal grassland, sometimes it's an underwater level. But other than that, it's very formulaic in terms of the first level's grass, the second one's underwater, and the fourth one's a castle. That's true with every single world. Because of this, it makes the game way shorter than most of the other Mario games, because there's not 8 levels per world, which means I was able to beat this game in 2 hours. I didn't use any save states or whatever. I did save the game, but that was only because I went to eat. I didn't save it and then lose a life and then go back to where I was. I just saved the game and left. Other than that, though, it's a really simple game, and it really shouldn't take you that long. Plus, a lot of the levels I wouldn't necessarily call challenging. There are a few specific enemies that can be, but the level design themselves, it isn't something where it's like, oh, this is super hard to get to, or this is, just a challenging boss battle. It's very simple when you break it down. Obviously, most villains in Mario games, you just jump on to kill. And then, it started with this game. You get the Goombas, which are the little mushroom men that you can just jump on. You got Koopa Troopas or turtles or whatever that you can get into their shell and then push around. Very classic Mario villains, but they had to start from somewhere, and they started in this game. So I have to give the game props for at least establishing the basic world of Mario. And the actual villain designs themselves I quite like. I like the different, it's a mushroom guy, or it's a turtle, or it's a giant turtle. They're good designs for villains, and they have different properties that make them unique compared to one another. Which is saying a lot, because compared to some other 2D platformers, or just games in general where you fight a bunch of people, it's like, oh, this is the same guy copied 20 times, and then they just changed his clothes. In this, each villain feels unique because they all have a unique moveset and they all do different things. That doesn't mean, however, that all of the villains are balanced properly. Goombas are like the easiest thing to kill as long as you don't just run into one. And the turtles, as long as you don't hit a shell that comes back at you, again, very easy to defeat and avoid. What isn't so easy is the Hammer Bros, and I don't know if that's like their official name, but that's what I think a lot of people call them. In this one specifically, they are really hard to defeat, because in future entries, there's a pattern to how they throw the hammers and how they themselves move. They often, in later entries, they'll throw like 3 or 4 in a row, then hop up to the next level of bricks and then do the same thing. But there's often a gap to where you can run in there and try to defeat them. In the first one, if there is a pattern, it's very hard to recognize, because I kept waiting for them to be a break in the arc of the hammer so that I could run through, but there just never was one. Especially when there's more than one on the screen at once, it's almost impossible to not get hit. So if you're in small Mario mode, you're gonna die. Which is why I found myself, whenever I knew that there was a Hammer Bro upcoming, or, I died to them and I went back through a second time, I would often just run right past the screen and then they would disappear into the void behind you, so you didn't really have to deal with them. And that's, even though that might be considered cheating, it's an actual strategy to beat this game, because I don't think there's any other way to defeat them. Unless, of course, you have a Fire Flower, in which case you can just throw that at them. Now, one thing that kind of measures a Mario game in terms of whether or not it's considered good or not is its boss battles. And in this regard, the first one fails miserably, because these might be the worst boss battles I've ever played in a video game. They're not good. For starters, while I do like the design of Bowser, he doesn't really do anything in the game. His pattern is like super easy to recognize and how to defeat him, and most of the time you know where Bowser's gonna be, because the way they set up the level, it's the exact same every time. So if you're running into a corridor, you're like, oh, Bowser's gonna be here. So what you can do like 90% of the time is just run in there and jump over him at the right time and hit the axe without him doing anything at all, and the battle lasts like 1 second. It's not really fun that way. It's just more so, hey, I have to jump over this giant lizard. Later on in the game, when he gets the hammers, that's when it gets a little bit trickier, though you can still do that trick as long as you're fast enough. If you're not fast enough, or if you're small Mario and can't afford to take a hit, it's a little bit more challenging, but it's still not hard. All you have to do is wait for him to go back and forth, and when he goes forward, he will not throw the hammers, and that gives you the opportunity to jump over him. But there's nothing else to the battles. It's just figure out when you can jump over him, and that's it. Some of the battles, he'll start firing like fire breath out of his mouth before you get to him, which is another sign that he's upcoming, but that's not exactly something that's hard to avoid. Most of the time you can just jump over it, and if you can't, there's like convenient gaps in the floor that you can just hide in. It'll pass you, and then you can jump and do the same and just repeat it over and over again. The other problem with the boss battles in this game is they're very repetitive. There is no Bowser Jr. to break up the monotony, or whatever happens in some DS games where you play like a giant fish or something. In this one, it's just Bowser at the end of every level, and it doesn't change at all, so there's no new strategy involved. It's just jump over him. Also, the final boss battle in this game is very weak. It doesn't feel like a triumphant end, more so just another castle stage that you have to beat, and there's nothing really unique about it. Except for one thing. So this game does something different with the castles that I believe no other game in the series has ever done, and that's some of the castles in this game aren't direct castles. Not like the rest of them. Some of the castles in this game are just mazes, or like maze-like puzzles, where you have to enter them in a certain way. There's like, a divider in the middle of the screen, and you have to pick one side or the other and just kind of run. And if you pick the wrong side, you'll eventually just loop the stage. It's, you're running to the right, you may have an obstacle or two to jump over, and then you just get back to where you started. The first time I came across this, I was just very confused, because I've never played anything like this in a Mario game before. Which I have to give it props for its uniqueness, but at the same time, it's not really engaging. It was just more frustrating, because I didn't understand what was happening. However, in the first one, it's very simple. It's very easy to just guess your way forward, because, you have to take one level the first time and one level the second time, and then you're at the end. So it's not exactly hard. You have like a 1 in 4 shot as long as you're just guessing and don't like look up a walkthrough. It's pretty easy to figure out the first one. The second castle like this, however, is just annoying. It's not hard, it's just you would never be able to guess it without looking up a walkthrough, because it's like super in detail. You have to jump over one specific block in order to get to the next part, run a little bit, jump, run a little bit, and then jump up, and it's just, why do you have to make it so complicated? I don't even know how you would figure that out if you didn't have a walkthrough. It almost just seems like they're just padding for time in the last castle, which is probably what they were doing, considering that it was early NES, and a lot of NES games like that just artificially padded playtime with either just extreme difficulty or just not making sense. Other than those two instances, there's really no need for a walkthrough. There's not a lot of really big secrets to find, and, you know, most of the time it'll just be go down a pipe, and you can only enter like 3 or 4 in the entire game, so it's not like it's going to take you very long. I want to avoid giving these games a score necessarily, because I don't want to be like, oh, this is a 6 out of 10 game or whatever, because that's very, you know, depends on your, you know, your interests and your where do you want to start or whatever. However, I do want to say that this Mario game is a good game, especially for early NES. I think it's one of the better early NES, like the black box NES games, probably the best of all of them. And if you want to see where Mario got to start, it's not necessarily going to disappoint you, because at the end of the day, it is still Mario. But if you're looking for only one old school Mario game to play, this one would probably not be the one I would recommend. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little review thing. I'm planning on doing all of the ones that I can do, so I don't know if I'm going to do Lost Levels next, or the second, like the American second one. I haven't decided yet. I've already filmed the American second one, but I don't know when I'm going to post that. If you guys have any thoughts on the original Mario game, if you've played it or have beaten it, comment down below what you think about it. Also, I got my lights set up for this video, so hopefully it looks pretty cool. I spent a lot of money on these. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Goodbye!